Okay, so I am going to share my screen with everybody, and I'm just going to jump right into our little presentation here. Hopefully we'll have time at the end for some conversation, but if you have anything that's really gnawing at you while I'm giving my portion of it, feel free to chime in and ask questions or clarification or anything like that. I'm totally open to that. Okay, so... Okay, can everybody see my presentation screen all right? Okay, I see some thumbs up, perfect. All right, so today we are talking about improving academic integrity through authentic assessment. We've made it through the spring semester. Some of you probably were not expecting to teach online and ended up having to do that. Maybe that went well, maybe it didn't. But from a number of different faculty members and emails and phone calls, and Zoom meetings, and our survey feedback, we know that cheating and academic integrity is a concern of many faculty right now. So this is a topic we wanted to talk about to address that, hopefully. Okay, so we are gonna first talk about recognizing the problem with cheating. Why should we care about this in the first place? This should only take a couple minutes because I'm pretty sure you all are intimately familiar with why we should care. Then we're going to talk about rethinking our assessments in a way that does two things. Makes the assessments more meaningful, meaning we can be more confident that we are actually measuring student learning and student understanding, but also rethinking those assessments in a way that cultivates academic integrity and discourages cheating in the first place. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some ideas for keeping your grading workload manageable, because anytime we talk about changing assessments, one of the first concerns is, what's that going to do to my workload? It's all well and good to try some new assessment activities and new strategies, new assignments, but can I stay on top of the grading that that requires? So we're going to talk about what that means. All right, let's just jump right in here. So how common is cheating? A researcher named Donald McCabe runs the International Center for Academic Integrity, and he has been studying the issue of cheating both in higher ed and in the K-12 system for many, many years. He's got survey data with thousands of students, both in high school and in college for the last 15 years. So he's got a lot of data on this. And what he has found through those surveys, out of 17,000 undergraduate college students surveyed in the last 15 years or so, 39% of them admitted to cheating on a test, 62% of them admitted to cheating on a written assignment, and 68% total admitted to cheating in some way during their college career. Doesn't mean all those students are cheating constantly, it means they cheated at least once during their time in college. And it doesn't just start in college. Obviously, he's also surveyed 70,000 high school students. 95% of them admitted to cheating at some point in high school. So the problem is widespread, unfortunately. Why do students cheat? There's a lot of really good research on this topic that have interviewed individual students, done anonymous surveys, all kinds of different forms of data gathering to figure out why students cheat in the first place. And here's kind of the trends that researchers have found. Some students cheat because of performance concerns. In other words, if they feel like they need to get an A for whatever reason, whether it's to satisfy their family, get a scholarship, get into grad school, whatever their reasons are for performance concerns, that drives some students to feel like they need to cheat. External pressures, meaning something else is going on in their life. They might have a job that they also have to work full time. They might have family obligations. They might have children. They might have health problems. They have something going on in their life that prevents them from feeling like they can be successful in college. Whether that feeling is accurate or not, we don't know, but those pressures make them feel like they don't have a choice. Conflicting loyalties is when a buddy asks you for some help. You know, your friend in the class says, hey, I know you took this class last year. Could I just look at your paper? I just want to see how you did it, and then I'm going to write my own. Well, what we know from many, many specific examples, a lot of times what happens is you share your paper with your buddy thinking you're helping him out, and what he's really doing is copying off your work. He's plagiarizing from you. Or they might pressure you to share test answers. They might even pressure your friend, you might even pressure a friend to take the test for you. We know that it happens because we've seen it happen. Opportunity just means that, how do I put this bluntly? If you make it easy to cheat on an assessment, some students are just going to take that opportunity. They were not planning on cheating. They did not go into the class expecting to cheat. But, you know, for an extreme example, if you left the answer key sitting on the desk and left the room, that's an opportunity to cheat. That's a very obvious extreme example, but if a quiz is set up in a way that lets students see the answers after the quiz is over so that they could share that answer with their buddy, well, that's giving them the opportunity to cheat. Lack of effort, you know, we shouldn't deny the fact that some students just are not putting in the effort that they should put in to be successful in college. Because of that lack of effort, sometimes they put things off, they don't study, and then they cheat to get by. And then lastly, academic culture in your classroom or on your campus. If students feel that a large percentage of their classmates are cheating, then they're more likely to cheat themselves. Conversely, if there is a sense that the rest of the class and the instructor cares about academic integrity and makes a point to talk about that and is clearly interested in maintaining that culture of integrity, then they're less likely to cheat. So what forms of cheating are most common? Again, some of this is from research, some of this is from our own experience in our classes on the 2 CCS campuses. Study guide websites are a big one, especially for multiple choice quiz questions. And especially if you are relying on quizzes created by textbook publishers, there's about a 95% chance that those questions exist online on one of these study guide websites. Chegg, Quizlet, and Course Hero are probably the most popular ones. There are other ones out there as well. If you rely on publisher textbook questions, copy and paste one of those questions into Google and see what comes up. There's a very high chance that one of those 3 sites is going to be in the top results, and it's going to give you the answer to that question, along with, most likely, the answers to all of the quiz questions for that chapter, which were created by the publisher. And unfortunately, this isn't just limited to publisher questions. Sometimes students taking a popular class will share the answers, even if the questions were created by the instructors. Sometimes the students will share those answers onto these websites so that other students can use them. Waiting for answers or test collusion. Again, a lot of times this comes down to the settings in the quiz. I'll give a specific example from the last institution I worked at. We had a grad program class, statistics, and it put a lot of weight on some multiple choice quiz tests. What the instructor found about halfway through the semester was consistently almost everybody was getting 100%, except for like 1 person per quiz was not getting such a great score. Can you think about maybe what was happening there? Any guesses? Okay, so here's what happened. The way the instructor had the quiz set up, once a student completed the quiz, they saw their own score, they saw all the questions, and they were given the answers. So what the entire class did is they got together on social media, outside the classroom, away from the instructor, and they set up a rotating schedule where for each quiz, one student would kind of play the sacrificial lamb, take the quiz first. Hopefully they do okay, but even if they didn't, it didn't matter, because after they hit submit, they got to see all the questions and all the answers, which they wrote down or took a screenshot of, and then they shared it with the rest of the class. So student number 1 maybe got a C on the quiz, but he gave the answers to everybody else and everybody else passed. Second quiz comes around, a different student plays the sacrificial lamb, takes the test, shares the answers with everybody else. And unfortunately, the instructor did not realize this until halfway through the class after they'd done 4 or 5 quizzes. So that's what test collusion can, again, that's a very extreme example. Usually it's not that widespread, but students do this all the time. You may have seen this before, falsely claiming system errors, where a student will claim to have some kind of technology problem. Or they will even, I've seen this and it's kind of clever, they will submit a document into a written assignment folder in Canvas, and it's full of gobbledygook. It looks like it's corrupted. It looks like it's a file that got damaged in the transfer or something. They do this on purpose. There was never any actual written assignment there. It was always garbled, but they submit it. The instructor, waits until the deadline, starts grading the papers, finds this one, and then says, uh-oh, something happened. They email the student and say, can you please resubmit this? And then the student resubmits, but what they've really done is they've given themselves an extra 2 or 3 days to get the paper done, and then they submit it at that time. And a lot of times they get away with it because sometimes technology problems do happen, but sometimes students falsely claim a technology problem. Paper recycling, paper sharing, and self-plagiarism are, again, unfortunately common. Paper sharing is when you share your paper with your buddy and they copy something out of it. We've seen some really terrible examples where the student forgets to change the name on their buddy's paper and just submits the entire thing. In that case, it's pretty obvious what happened. But that's not usually how it goes. Usually they'll copy large chunks of it. Maybe they'll copy their citations. Maybe they'll take some paragraphs, or maybe they'll rewrite it in their own words, but they're still borrowing their friend's paper. Paper recycling or self-plagiarism is when a student uses a paper that they've written in a different class and submits it in this class. This happens, well, unfortunately it happens if the instructor gives too vague or too broad of a writing topic. So it's more likely that the student has an existing paper that would meet the criteria for that assignment, and they just change the date on it and they hit submit. And then something that unfortunately we are seeing more of is contract plagiarism or paper writing services. You can go online and search for paper writing services and find many, many websites where for a surprisingly small amount of money, someone else will write a paper for you. You tell them what the criteria for the paper is. You'll say, I need a 5-page paper with 6 citations on such and such topic. And then you pay them $50 and they write the paper for you and they submit it. They give it to you to submit. At CCS, we do not have any plagiarism detection software built into Canvas, but even if we did, it wouldn't catch these contract papers because they are original works. They are original papers, they just weren't written by the student. Okay, so based on some of those, both the influences that cause students to cheat and the forms of cheating that we often see, we have to think, are some activities inviting cheating? Are we creating a situation where students are more likely to cheat because of the way we set up an assignment, the way we structured it, the way we've set the settings on the quiz or the paper or whatever? And what we have seen is higher stakes, the low order thinking assignments are going to invite cheating. In other words, if it's something that requires, for example, a lot of memorization, and it has a very large grade point value on that assignment, that's going to invite cheating. Multiple choice quizzes with significant grading implications, which is kind of just another way of saying the same thing, right? If you are giving a multiple choice quiz with a very high grade on it, that is going to be something that encourages students to cheat, especially by looking for those study guide websites. Quiz questions provided by textbook publishers. Again, those are ridiculously easy to find answer keys for online. So it is giving students the opportunity to cheat. Overly broad or general writing topics is something that most especially invites paper recycling or paper sharing, because it's just too easy to find some existing work of yours that you can pass off in this other class. Large summative assignments without any preceding scaffolding. So if you have a very large project of some kind, it might be a large paper, it might be a high stakes quiz, it might be some other form of project that is kind of put onto the class schedule at the end of the quarter, but you don't do a lot of scaffolded work ahead of time, then that is something that often invites cheating. The reason that invites cheating is because students are not particularly good at time management. So often they will wait until the last minute to even start on a project like this. And then they start on it, They look at the amount of work ahead of them, they look at their calendar, and they panic. They say, there's no way I'm gonna get this done on time. I don't have a choice. I'm gonna have to cheat somehow. I'm gonna have to borrow my friend's presentation. I'm gonna have to pay a paper writer. I'm gonna have to copy a chunk of text off of Wikipedia or something, because I don't feel like I have enough time to get this done. So then a question that often comes up in this topic is, can technology catch and prevent cheating? And here's my answer. Well, maybe, sometimes, but we do have some technology built into Canvas that we can use to detect and deter some forms of cheating. We have the Respondus monitor for taking tests, which I don't know if you're familiar with it or not, but what it does is it forces the students to download a special piece of software that connects to their web camera, and at the start of the test, it tells them, you need to hold up your ID to prove that you're you, and then you need to take your camera, you need to flash it around the room to prove that no one else is in there, or you don't have notes in front of you, or something like that. And then it allows you to take the quiz. And while you're taking that quiz, it is recording live video the whole time. So it's keeping an eye on what you're doing. It's recording the students' facial movements, or if they leave the camera, if they're no longer in screen, then it flags that as suspicious activity. We have that, but almost every student has one of these. And I could have this under my desk on my lap, or I could have it propped up on my computer screen behind my camera. And you're gonna have no way of knowing that I have that cell phone there. The second problem that unfortunately we see is not all students can easily download and install Respondus Monitor. I don't know how many of our students use Chromebooks, but I suspect it's a large proportion because Chromebooks are cheap and readily available. But Chromebooks do not run Microsoft Windows, and they don't run the Apple Mac operating system. They run Chrome OS, and Chrome OS cannot install and use Respondus. So if a student is relying on a Chromebook as their primary device, they will not even be able to take that test. They might be able to go into a computer lab or to a library or something like that, but unfortunately right now especially, they may not have that option. So I have some concerns with relying too much on technology as a way of preventing and detecting cheating. Yes, we have some services available. Yes, they are helpful in some circumstances, but sometimes I worry that they are too easy to bypass, and sometimes I worry about the equity issues of making students have to use some of these tools. So I don't want to harp on that too much, because a lot of people use them. A lot of people have caught students cheating using them. So I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but that's why I say maybe, sometimes, but. So that brings us to the big portion of our topic today. Are there other activities that could reduce cheating? So we already talked about the things that invite cheating. What about activities that maybe don't invite cheating? So formative assessments with lower stakes, students are less likely to cheat on those. You might do pop quizzes or review tests or something like that, just to make sure that students have memorized the vocabulary or something like that. But if you do them as a formative assessment, meaning it's at the beginning of a process to kind of gauge where they're starting from and then go forward from there, rather than a summative assessment, which is the end point, is the point where you test them in some way and then you give them a grade and then that's the end. But if the assessments are more formative and have lower stakes, then there's less of that pressure on students to cheat for some of those various reasons that students cheat. Questions that test higher order thinking are harder to cheat on. So if you're asking them like a scenario question or a word problem or something like that, where they aren't simply looking up the answer in a book or on Google or memorizing out of the textbook, they're actually using their knowledge to solve a problem. That's harder to cheat on. It's also usually leads to better learning outcomes for the students if they have to apply their knowledge to do something. Writing prompts that are specific or personal, much harder to recycle someone else's work or your own work from a previous class. If you're giving them a more specific topic, or better yet, letting them hone in on a specific topic that is more personal to them, and giving them some guidance as they do that, and having them give you a proposal on the topic that they want to cover, and then working with them on that, then it's harder to recycle your own work or borrow a buddy's paper. Also harder to do contract plagiarism if it's a personal topic. You know, if I'm talking about my own childhood, it's a lot harder for somebody on one of those contract writing websites to write about my experiences, because they don't have the same experiences, they don't have the same background, they don't have the same history. So it has to be something about me that I can talk about. And then scaffolded activities that kind of build on each other throughout a quarter. So again, if you have a large project, don't just give them the large project at the end of the semester and say, here it is, don't forget about this in 3 weeks. Build that scaffolding into your course curriculum. So for example, if you're going to do a large paper, then you might earlier in the semester have them give the proposal on the topic they want to write about. They submit that proposal to you, you read it, you approve it, or you give them some feedback and they give you a different proposal. And then you have them maybe do a reference page or a bibliography where they are doing their own research and they're sharing their research with you. And then after they've done that, then they write the introduction paragraph or the intro page. And then they write a first draft and they give you the draft. And then they submit the final paper. Doing this does a few things. One, it's a lot harder to use contract plagiarism for this because you're not likely to find the same contract writer over and over again and say, okay, today I need you to write me a proposal. And then come back a week later, okay, now I need you to write me a reference page. Okay, now I need you to write me a first draft. Okay, now after the first draft, I need you to write me the finished version. It's not really feasible to do that in a contract plagiarism setting most of the time. The second thing this does is it can help a lot with that lack of effort and that external pressure influences on cheating, because you're giving students opportunities to get started on the work earlier. You're helping them through that. You're hopefully keeping in touch with them as they go. So if they hit a wall, if they have some life circumstances that prevent them from being successful, then you catch that early rather than waiting until the end of the quarter when they fail to turn in the work. Okay, and then projects that require creative effort. This might be a video, it might be a portfolio, it might be a presentation, something where they're not simply either writing a paper or taking a test, but they're actually putting some sort of creative effort into it. Videos are especially great because they can see and hear the student themselves. If they have to talk about a topic that they have researched or worked on their own, then again, it's very hard to plagiarize that. Maybe they got some help doing the research ahead of time, but they still have to be the ones responsible for presenting the material. And obviously during an online setting, this is a little harder, but in a live classroom situation, if a student is giving a presentation and then you have some follow-up questions for them, it's usually going to be very obvious very quickly whether they did the work or not. If they're just giving a presentation that someone else wrote for them, it's going to be quickly apparent that it's not their work. And then lastly, and this is more of a philosophical thing for this whole concept, activities that emphasize process over product. So I'm a millennial. I'm from the previous generation than most of the high school and college students today who are Gen Z. But for the last couple generations, social media has been such a big part of these kids' lives. That's how they consume their media. That's where their role models are. And a big part of social media is bragging about the cool things that you are doing or that have happened to you. You post a great picture from your vacation. Here I am at the beach. You don't post about how much work it was to save up for that trip, how hard it was to go through the travel process, all the things that went wrong along the way, all the little things that didn't quite work out. You just see the finished product. You don't see the process. And I think a lot of students in this current generation don't always realize that all of those great finished products that they see, whether it's a music video or a movie or somebody's success, they don't always realize all the work and all the steps that it took to get to that point. So sometimes just being explicit about that process during the learning process can be really helpful to those students. Okay, so those are kind of the big, broad overview ideas here. I want to give a couple of specific actionable examples. And then if you are interested in them, then obviously it's going to be up to you to figure out how those work in your field. You know, you're the subject matter experts here, not me. So what these look like in your settings are going to be very different depending on what you're teaching. But I would love to talk to any of you individually about some of those ideas and maybe brainstorm them if you want to do any of these things. So one thing that I really like is just doing some kind of large scaffolded project. So again, building up to a large scaffolded project, you'd have lots of smaller graded activities that build towards that finished product over the course of the semester. It can be really helpful to allow some student choice and some personalization on these projects if it's possible. So let them pick a topic that they want to research or work on. Or maybe give them a short list of topics and let them pick from that list. Anytime you can let them make some choices on this, they're both going to have more buy-in. They're also going to be more invested in the topic because it's something that they are personally interested in. Which again, lets them personalize the topic, lets them bring in their own experiences and their own background and their own points of view, motivates them to get the work done. I think this is really important to recognize. You can get a lot of mileage out of a comprehensive multi-step project. You know, if you're relying on lots of small papers or small quizzes, then you are responsible for creating all of those papers, assignments, and all of those quizzes. You know, if you have 10 tests in a class, that's a lot of work to set those up in the first place, to make sure that all those questions aren't online, to shuffle them and randomize them, make different versions and all those things. Or you could think about having one larger project that your students are spending a large chunk of the quarter working towards, with all these steps along the way. And obviously you as the instructor are involved in each of those steps, but honestly, it can be less work for you than to create lots of these other kinds of assessments. There's tons of different steps you could integrate into one of these projects. Project proposal, obviously, where the students are picking the topic or the project that they want to work on, sending you that proposal, and then you're giving them feedback saying, well, that's a great idea, go for it. Or, well, that's too broad, let's narrow this a little bit. Or, you know, here's some potential problems here, maybe we should rethink this. Giving them some feedback on that proposal, and then letting them move forward at that point. Doing an introduction paragraph, or an introduction page, or even an introduction video if this is maybe a project that involves video. Again, this is letting you see what the student is getting into the student's head as they're working on this project. And a lot of times, just by looking at that introduction paragraph or page, you're going to identify some potential problems early on in the project, and you're going to be able to help intervene with that student before they get way into the weeds on something that ends up turning into a disaster. You can catch them early and saying, wait a second, let's hold up a second, let's back up, maybe we want to reevaluate this. It also gives the student a chance to get that feedback from you so that they know that they are on the right track. They are moving in a direction that is going to make sense, and they're more confident as they move forward on that project. Something that I really like is annotated bibliographies, where you're having students going out and researching a topic. You know, tell them, I want you to find 6 articles on subject X, and then I want you to annotate them. In other words, write a little paragraph for each one telling the instructor what that article is about, what its findings are, why you chose that for your bibliography. You get so much assessment mileage out of a good annotated bib assignment because the students are doing a ton of research on their own, doing a ton of reading on their own. They are having to choose from the vast array of material on a particular topic and choose the things that are interesting to them. And then they have to tell you why it's interesting. So there's so much information that you glean out of a good annotated bibliography. I just love them. Decision-making heuristics, which can look like a lot of different things depending on the subject matter. In the past, I've had students create decision-making rubrics as a way of helping narrow down their project, where I'll tell them, you need to pick a Okay, so a class that I've taught in the past is a learning technologies class, and I'll give them an assignment. You need to choose a technology that you want to integrate into your teaching practice, because a lot of them were K-12 teachers getting their degree. So you need to make a decision-making rubric to help you choose a technology. So you need to come up with the specific criteria that you're looking for. The criteria might mean, is it affordable enough for my classroom? Do I have the hardware that can run it? Is it easy enough for me to teach my students? Decision-making criteria like that. And then they have to apply their rubric to a vast pool of choices and help narrow down those choices to the thing that they ultimately settle on. So again, any kind of decision-making heuristic or rubric is a great tool for having your students actually engage with the material. Doing some sort of check-in along the way is helpful for the student and also helpful for you. It could be individual, one-on-one appointments. It could be as a group in the classroom. It could be in the discussion board in Canvas. It could be a live Zoom meeting. But any kind of check-in where you are asking the students, where are you on your project? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? Have you gotten this part of it done yet? Or do you feel like your workload is manageable? It's giving the students confidence that they are on the right track. It's giving you confidence that the student kind of knows what they're doing. Because again, if you just give them an assignment and you're just sitting there waiting for the work to come in, you have no idea what those students are doing. You don't know where they are in the process. You don't know if they understand the instructions or not. So check-ins, I think, are vital. Assigning some sort of reflection for the students, having them write or talk about their own experience as they go through this. What did you find interesting about this topic? What did you find challenging about this topic? How did this topic relate to your previous experiences in life? What about this topic makes you want to learn more? Getting them to reflect on those things can be hugely valuable, both for their own understanding of the topic and again, for your ability to assess their own understanding. And then exit interviews at the end of a big project. This isn't always appropriate, but sometimes it is, where you're gonna sit down with those students and ask them about their project, their finished product. Why did you make this choice? Why did you go this direction instead of this direction? Can you tell me more about this part of it? By asking those kinds of questions during an exit interview, again, you're making sure that they have reached an adequate level of understanding, but you're also going to catch cheating pretty effectively if you do this. Because again, if they aren't the ones that did the work, you're gonna be able to tell pretty quickly based on those exit interviews, based on those follow-up questions. Another kind of assessment would be learning portfolios or presentations, where you're having students create some kind of portfolio or presentation based on all the things that they've done in this class. You're asking them to collect all of the previous work that they've done and present it as a narrative. You're asking them to find articles or research online that they have found helpful and present that to the class. The students are sharing artifacts that they've either created in class or artifacts that they found via independent research. Usually includes some kind of reflection justifying why they selected each artifact. So it's not just enough to put 5 things in a PowerPoint presentation. You need to be able to explain why you chose those 5 things. It might include a live presentation, a video presentation, or a slideshow presentation. I've also seen instructors use Google Sites where the student is building a website. Wix is a free web hosting service. There's many, many different options that you can use to help students create portfolios. And I can talk about those later on if you're interested in going down that road. But just know that there's many different options for presenting that portfolio in some way. Okay, so that's great, but how do you manage all that workload? Because that sounds like a lot more work than just letting Canvas grade a multiple choice quiz, right? So yes and no, but mostly yes. Yes, it is more work in some ways. But there are things that you can do to lessen that workload. Rubrics, I love rubrics. Rubrics are a huge help. For many, many kinds of assignments, you can create a rubric with different criteria that you are judging the student submission on. You probably can't even read this, it's probably too small. That was a rubric for a working paper project that I had students work on. This does a couple things. One, if you have a good rubric and you give it to your students, then they know what the expectations are for that assignment. They can make sure that they are meeting your expectations good enough to get a passing grade, rather than just leaving that to guesswork on their part, which can be very frustrating and very anxiety-inducing for some students, to not quite be sure what you're looking for. Well, a rubric helps with that a lot. It also helps you as the instructor kind of focus in on what you're actually looking for. You know, it's easy to tell students, I want you to write a 5-page paper on X, but what are you actually looking for? Are you looking for writing quality? Well, then that should be in your rubric. Are you looking for quality of research? Well, then that should be in your rubric. You know, what are the things that you are looking for as the instructor? What are you trying to assess? All those things should be written down somewhere. It shouldn't just be an internal instinctual thing on your part. We like to tell ourselves that we are good at being objective in that way, but we really aren't. So having a rubric can really help with that objectivity as well. Once you have a good rubric, and once you have created it in Canvas, which I can help you with later on if you don't know how to do that, you can attach those rubrics to any kind of activity or assignment in Canvas. And when you do that, so let's say it's a paper, you have a nice rubric created, your students are submitting their papers and they're looking at them in Canvas. As you're reading the paper here, you have the rubric here. And all you have to do is check off the level for each criteria that that paper has met, and it will turn it into a grade for you. And then the students see their grade, but they also see how their rubric was scored, which gives them a lot of feedback without you having to spend time writing feedback, right? A good rubric is excellent feedback without you having to spend a ton of time writing. I could talk about rubrics for another hour, I'm not going to. A rule of thumb that I was told once that really made a lot of sense to me is if you're going to be using rubrics, it often makes sense to have more criteria and more levels for those summative projects, those early projects in the quarter, and then having fewer criteria and levels as the class progresses. Because this gives them a lot more feedback early in the semester, and it kind of sets the tone for your expectation, gives them a lot more actionable information to improve on their work. And then towards the end of the semester, hopefully the student needs less and less of that, and they're going to be focused more on the quality of their work, or hopefully if it's a really good, interesting project, then they're actually interested in making something cool. And they don't need as many criteria and as many levels, which then saves you work on the grading. If you have pared down those criteria towards the end of the quarter, then it's going to be easier and faster for you to grade the work. Another thing that I have seen some instructors do that I kind of like, have students self-assess with a rubric. I've seen this especially on written assignments, but you can really do it for almost anything. You make a rubric for the students, but rather than just making that grid in Canvas, you kind of turn it into this little written first-person rubric. And then you write that out, you put it as a template, you give it to your students, and then you tell them, I want you to copy this rubric and paste it into the bottom of your project and score yourself on this before you submit it. You may or may not actually have to put a point value on that, saying 5% of your grade is just putting this thing at the end of the paper, just to get them to do it. And then they have to score themselves based on that rubric. You might also have them do a little brief written reflection at the end. You know, how do I feel that this project went? Could I have done something better? Did I spend enough time on it? Did I manage my time wisely? I've seen some instructors have some reflection, but I've also just seen the scoring rubric. This does a couple of things. One, it makes the grading a little bit faster and a little bit easier for you because it's going to streamline what your expectations are for the paper. So for the example here, one of the requirements was just, is your video 5 to 10 minutes long? Is it uploaded to YouTube and is set as unlisted? Those are pretty objective, pretty simple criteria to grade. If the student gives themselves a 3 on that, Well, they probably just did. So you probably don't have to spend a ton of time worrying about that. You don't need to get out your timer and count the length of the video. They're probably just going to do it. But the other thing this does is it can really improve the quality of the work that the students do in the first place. If you're forcing them, in theory anyway, not for every student. I see Linda's grinning about that, and I don't know what that grin means. Maybe she can tell me later. But in theory, it is forcing the students to actually think about their own work and ask themselves, am I actually satisfied with this? Did I actually do what the instructions said? And in some cases, the student is actually going to go back and do a little bit more work on that before they hit submit, because they want to be able to honestly give themselves that extra point. Or if they've genuinely done a good job and they met all those criteria and they give themselves a good, honest score, then they're going to feel more confident in their own work, which reduces student anxiety, hopefully even reduces the amount of questions that you get. You're going to get fewer nagging emails if you do something like this. So those are just a couple of specific things that you could consider doing to manage your grading workload. Again, yes, these projects are going to require some effort to grade, especially compared to an automated test where the scores just roll in by themselves and you don't have to do anything. But I think it's worth doing, and I think there are tools that you can use to make that more manageable. Some other tips for managing grading workload: be very intentional about your written feedback. I think that written feedback, personalized feedback to students is hugely important, but it's easy to spend way too many hours giving that feedback that a student isn't even going to read. You know, you can give a student a page of feedback and most of them are probably not going to read it. So be very intentional about the feedback that you're giving them. Sometimes it's also useful to give collective feedback rather than individual feedback. If you're seeing the same mistake over and over and over again in the class, you probably don't need to write that for each individual student. Just make a course announcement or talk about it in class. You know, okay, last week's paper, I saw a lot of confusion about this point. Let's talk about that in class. Let's make sure everybody's on the same page on this. You know, you don't have to spend all that time giving all that written feedback when a collective announcement might be good enough. Examine your assessments in regards to the learning outcomes of the class. I've seen this a lot where an instructor is spending a ridiculous amount of time grading the grammar of a paper, but the class is not about grammar, you know. And there's a fine line there, because yes, we want students to be good writers, but you have to ask yourself, are you spending your assessment time on the things that actually matter for this class? Are you spending your assessment time actually measuring the outcomes that you want to measure in this class? It's sometimes, especially if it's a class that you've had for many years and it's kind of slowly grown and evolved over time, sometimes it's valuable to take a step back, look at your course objectives, look at your activities, and look at the way you're grading those activities and ask yourself, have we kind of gotten in the weeds on this a little bit? Are there some areas where we could pull back a little bit? Are there some areas where we could kind of go back to the fundamentals? I think it's always helpful to examine those things and to think about your learning objectives. Set clear policies on late work, because again, I'm all for having flexibility in due dates and deadlines. And we're actually going to do that as a topic later in the fall specifically, because there's a lot you can talk about there. But a trap that I have seen some faculty fall into is they are generous and flexible with their late work policies, but then they are killing themselves grading and giving feedback on assignments that should have come in 3 weeks ago and are just now trickling in. That's really hard for you, because now you're trying to go back in the class. Okay, what did we do 3 weeks ago? I gotta get this answer key back out from the stack. I gotta remember where we were at. I gotta do all this stuff. Your head's not in that space anymore. You're up here and the students are still trickling in work back here. So one thing that I have found helpful, if you are going to be flexible in your late work policies, and I think you should, we'll talk about that later, but if you are, then you should also have some clear boundaries about your grading policies and especially about your feedback for the late work. So what I've told students is, I'm not going to penalize you for late work, or at least I'm going to have a small grade penalty for late work, but I still want you to turn it in because I can't assess you if you turn in nothing, right? It doesn't do either of us any good if you get a 0 on this assignment. So I want you to turn it in. But because of my workload and because of the stuff that I'm working on, I'm not going to give you much written feedback on this. I'm going to go through it, I'm going to do the rubric, I'm going to give you a score, and then we're going to move on. I'm not going to spend an hour writing corrections on this paper. And then I'll tell the students, if you want specific feedback on this, or if you have a question, call me. And if they need it badly enough, or they want it badly enough to do that, then I'm willing to give them that time, because chances are they need it. But I think it's helpful and important to have those clear expectations and those boundaries on that, because you can kill yourself trying to keep up with grading late papers. When you're in the middle of a assignment, in the middle of a grading project, you've got a huge stack of papers or 25 submissions in Canvas or whatever, if you find a student that you're a little suspicious of, you suspect plagiarism, you suspect cheating, there's something just not right, set it aside and keep going with everybody else. Because again, if you find that paper and something's wrong, suddenly you're completely off track. The rest of your evening is shot because now you're so hyper-focused on catching this kid that you stop getting the rest of your work done. I think that you should investigate plagiarism. I'm not saying don't investigate it. I'm saying kind of prioritize getting the rest of the grading done first and then worry about that one the next day. Set it aside, worry about that one tomorrow. Get everything else done now so that you don't get so backed up. Again, that's from personal experience. I've gone way down the rabbit hole on a paper on a student that I thought was up to no good. And then I didn't get anything else done the rest of the weekend because I was so focused on this thing. It wasn't worth it. I should have waited till Monday. I should have talked to the IT guy who could help me look at some of this stuff. I should have just gotten the rest of the papers done. Okay, so that's pretty much what I have for the topic today. Hopefully some of that was useful to you. Hopefully some of that was some food for thought. If you have any specific projects that you are interested in looking at, some ideas that you want to brainstorm with somebody, I am very, very happy and enthusiastic to sit down with you via Zoom or a phone call or an email and talk those out. So don't hesitate to reach out to me if you want to talk about some of those things.